I'm I'm the director's right hand when it comes to visualizing an idea. And I'm also the manager of a large part of the film crew, sometimes in my world 40 or 60 people. So, page 2. So the way I look at it is I'm at once the director's confidant, cheerleader, psychologist, clearly collaborator, and also part field general. So the cinematographer kind of has to have, it's an interesting position because you have to have facility jumping back and forth between the left hemisphere of your brain and the right hemisphere of your brain instantaneously, right? We were talking about this last night actually at dinner, which I really enjoyed. You know, you have to, while doing that, have to maintain kind of razor sharp focus you know, on the shot that you're executing at that moment, but also dedicate part of your brain to the thing that's coming next, right? Think forward a setup or 2 setups or after lunch to figure out how you can move the train forward, right? So one of the ways that ends up happening is the cinematographer is part of a number of triangles on set. And one of those triangles is a creative triangle. That's between or among the director and the production designer and the cinematographer. And that triangle is how we kind of create a visual style for whatever the project be. The other really important triangle that the cinematographer is part of is among the director, the assistant director, and the cinematographer, which is more logistical, right? Because at that point, I'm partially charged with maintaining a schedule, right? We have to make sure that I'm not taking too long to do my job, my creative job, and that I'm getting the director and the actors on set, on their feet, as quickly as possible so that they can do their work and they can actually get meaningful takes and meaningful performances, and that the director has ample time to do that. And I'm also trying to ensure that that we have enough coverage, right? That the editor then has enough footage to work with to create something meaningful in post-production. Another triangle that I'm one of my favorites is the triangle among the cinematographer and then the gaffer or the chief lighting technician and the key grip, and that really involves creating an effective and efficient lighting plan that we can execute throughout the job. And the main purpose of that plan is that we be able to support the subtext of the story, right? Support the emotional life of the characters if it's a movie or even if it's not a movie. We want to support the emotional life of those that we're shooting and ideally give the audience some sort of connection to the characters on the screen. I also have pretty delicate and vital relationships with the actors. Obviously with the producer, because what I do costs them money. With the camera crew, not to mention with the editor and with the colorist. In simplest terms, I view my job as a cinematographer. My primary objective is to create a meaningful connection between the human beings in the audience and those on screen, right? So what I want to talk with you about today is ways in which I use the tools that I have in order to do that and to avoid pitfalls that pull me away from that. Equally important. So I spend a significant amount of my time teaching, as I mentioned, and I talk in the classroom a lot about visual storytelling. That's the key component of what I do. And in the past 10 years, 8 to 10 years, I've found this weird shift towards what I call widgetry, right? Like this fascination with technology and like tools and how many K is that camera, and all this technical bullshittery, right? Well, I call it widgetry because I can't say bullshit in front of my students, excuse me. Anyway, so this, in place of like this connection with story and emotional truth, and I find it really problematic. And I also, let's look at why that is. So I think that the introduction of ever more affordable acquisition technology and also editing technology have led the charge. Because when I first started shooting, when I came out of the American Film Institute in the early 2000s. I have my MFA in cinematography from there. When I came out, our class was an interesting hybrid. We had a fierce background in shooting motion picture emulsion, shooting film, and pre-visualizing shooting film and understanding the post-process for shooting film. But then this was at the onset of a brand new thing called HD video. Right? 1999 was this crazy time, and there was this weird camera sitting in the camera center at AFI, and I used to bring lattes to the two monkeys who ran the room, and sorry, Chad and Brian. I used to bring the two gentlemen who ran the equipment cage. This is going to live on YouTube. I used to bring. It serves me. No, you won't. I don't believe that you will. Anyway, so. I used to bring Chad and Brian lattes so that I could play with the camera. Anyway, so I am by no means a Luddite and by no means a technophobe. I love new technology, I really do. However, the challenge here is when I first began my career, I was never asked, what kind of camera do you use? Nobody ever asked me that. And these days, well, in those days, decisions about film stock, cameras, lighting, lenses, color timing, and all that were entrusted to me as the cinematographer, right? I was at once given the responsibility for making those decisions, but I was also at that time given the authority to make those decisions. These days, I am still given the responsibility, but depending on the collaboration, may not be given the authority, which is a needle to be threaded politically. So flash forward 15 years, and now Super Bowl spots and countless national commercials, and as Evelyn mentioned, some 1,500 plus TED Talks later, and 2 emerging cinematographer awards from my guild, I'm harangued and henpecked. Often. In fact, I have written here ad nauseum about these choices, and even second guessed sometimes by those who, by no fault of their own, please don't take this as me insulting somebody else, let's just say that they're less qualified than I am to be making these calls, right? I think the democratization of our industry, the democratization of the film industry, which has kind of been caused by shrinking budgets and widespread and affordable high-quality acquisition and editing software and all that stuff, could actually make a vetted, qualified, passionate, devoted artist turn cynical, negative, defensive, and jaded. I know, because I've been there. I've lashed out at producers, asking innocent enough questions about whether or not I own a particular camera system on which we can shoot a project. I've lashed out at those same producers, or maybe kept it in and had it fester when they called me back to let me know that they've chosen a different cinematographer for that project, even though the director wanted to work with me because that person had the particular camera that they were looking for and offered to throw it into their day rate, right? So, I've spent months, maybe years sometimes, resenting those whom I felt maybe didn't have my degree of technical knowledge or skill, and certainly didn't, to me, have the creative sensitivity or political acumen that I've actually proven that I have again and again and again. But to what end? Why stay mad, right? Why let that fester? Because creative endeavors, this is something that I've learned, creative endeavors are somewhat like romantic endeavors. If other parties sense desperation on you, they're not interested. It's a self-feeding spiral, and it's a spiral that I was in the midst of and put an end to about 5 years ago. I was attached to a movie that was scheduled to shoot for roughly 6 weeks in Vancouver with about a 2-week prep in advance of that. The script was good, the director was excellent, and it was actually a dream job. The director and I had shot tests, we'd had numerous meetings about the look of the film, we had an approach, I had my crew, we were set to go. We talked about the visual style, and I'd just come off of shooting a couple of seasons of a television show, and I was really excited to move from 3-camera broadly lit comedy, which I'm sure you guys have seen, to a single-camera drama, which was going to allow me to dig in a little bit more. The only problem was the schedule kept getting pushed. April to May, May to June. Normally not a big deal. This just happened to be that June was the beginning of the 3rd trimester of my wife's first pregnancy. I'm sorry, of our pregnancy with our first child. It just so happened that June was the beginning of my wife's, the 3rd trimester of my wife's pregnancy with my son. Yes, there you go. Okay, so when this is not what I do, okay? I lights them and shoots them. I don't speak them. I'm sorry. So when I'd signed on to the film, I'd convinced myself and my wife that it would just be fine if I ducked out for a little while to go to Canada to shoot this movie. But now that it was encroaching on the end of her pregnancy and we hadn't even started pre-production, I had a switch go off in my head and I realized I couldn't shoot this movie, right? This was the biggest movie that I had been offered to date, and I had to walk away. So I called the director, who is himself a father, and he and I had a very honest, very difficult for me conversation, and I told him that I loved him and that I would lay down in front of a truck for him, but I could not shoot this movie. He understood, and we agreed that we would work on another project later. Unfortunately, my agent wasn't as understanding. And he and I spoke on the phone, and he lobbed some shameful words and shaming words my way, and I fired his ass on the spot. Figuring that if he didn't understand why I couldn't be out of town during the last trimester of my wife's pregnancy, he probably didn't know what kind of human being I was, and by extension of that, didn't know what kind of movies I wanted to shoot anyway, so wasn't going to be sending me any good scripts. So, thank you. So a couple of weeks later, in the last job that I had actually had scheduled, I didn't have any work after this job. I actually was talking to a camera assistant, and I told him that I felt like I had just committed career suicide because I fired my agent and I walked away from a perfectly good movie. He didn't say anything. He's a father of 3. He put his arm around me, and he actually, sorry, he actually said, they don't put your IMDb credits on your tombstone, on your headstone. What they put is devoted father and loving husband. So, pardon me for a second. The reason I shared that with you is that I realized at that point, which was a couple of weeks before my 39th birthday, that there was bullshit that I was going to stand for, and there was bullshit that I wasn't going to stand for, you know? And you know? so part of being an effective and valuable creative collaborator is having your bullshit-o-meter well calibrated. And I realized at that point that the thing that I had been trained for, which was shooting narrative feature films, maybe wasn't conducive to being happy and having a healthy marriage. So it's interesting because many of us in a variety of professions, this isn't specific to filmmaking and certainly isn't specific to cinematography, decide to be married to our jobs. And we end up placing our home lives in second position. That's fine for some people. I kind of realized that that wasn't going to fly with me. And I wasn't really comfortable letting my career decisions cost me potential happiness in my marriage. So while that was an unpopular, scary, but frankly liberating realization, I shifted my focus. I was no longer actively pursuing feature film. I was no longer actively pursuing narrative television, since the commitment would take me away from, would generally take me out of town. It would take me away from my family for too long. I'd already been teaching for about 6 years at that point, and I realized that if I never shot a day again, and all I did was teach visual storytelling, be around to raise my kids and hang out with my wife, I was actually going to be pretty happy and pretty fulfilled. And just like romantic relationships, once you don't smell of desperation, people come knocking. And all of a sudden, my commercial career picked up. And within a year, I'd shot two Super Bowl commercials, a mess load of national spots. And on top of that, the work I'd begun about 2 years earlier on this little project called TEDTalks. And when you watched, there were probably 5 of them online in 2006, 7. There were 5, but in 2006, 7, there were 5. Anyway, when I started in 2008, anyway, the work started to become, to heat up, you know, and it started to become much more compelling and much more frequent. So all of a sudden, you add that to the numerous second unit jobs that I was getting, both as a cinematographer and as a camera operator, on both narrative features and on television, and this weird new niche that I got as the go-to additional photography guy for a given studio on really high-budget movies. And not only was my career really varied and fulfilling, but also challenging. And most importantly, I was in control of it. No chance of 8 months away in Louisiana, Atlanta, Canada. I could feed my creative soul and be an active participant in my marriage and fathering my children. The one through line for me, I'm going to go long, I apologize. I already know it. The one through line for me, whether shooting a movie or a TED Talk or a doc or a commercial or whatever, is the pursuit of an organic connection, right? with the audience. And I've been working as a DP for about 15 years, and strangely, I find these days that my work gets much simpler. The amount of effort that I put forth is actually less than I did when I first started, because I'm not showing off as much. I'm not flexing my DP muscles all that much and going, look what I can do, rawr! You know, it's not about that anymore. It's really about telling the story. And I have a mantra that I actually repeat to myself often in my mind on set, and then I try to instill in my students, which is be nimble, be humble, right? To me, the idea of remaining nimble and humble relates to the fact that, so I'm a pretty technical guy, right? That's why I got into cinematography in the first place, left brain, right brain, it was really awesome. But I won't get mired in the technical widgetry and when discussions about the human condition and subtext would serve the story more, right? I will not talk about cameras. I will not. They're boxes. Don't ask. As for humility, well, I think we could all use a little bit more of that. So here's some approaches that I use in order to remain nimble and humble and to serve the story. First of all, stay vulnerable, stay emotionally honest, right? We live, as Erica was, as Erica was alluding to, we live in kind of a snarky and soundbitey, cynical world, right? And it's, believe me, I'm guilty of this. It's really fun to post kind of snipey, intelligent fodder on social media, but when our jobs involve creating deep emotional connection, there's no room for that, right? There's no room for that on set. There's no room for that in pre-production. And as you see, I often cry. I often cry when I'm reading scripts, right? I often cry when my eye is to the eyepiece behind the camera. It happens. That degree of emotional connection to the material ensures that I'm always engaged, always rereading the material to find deeper meaning. And I hope to establish a deeper emotional experience for the audience as well by doing that. So the second thing is, I try never to say, I think, right? When I'm talking with a director about something creative. It's not about my idea. Rather, I try to say the story wants, or it feels like, or maybe the audience would want to see A, or the audience wants to feel this. Because there's seldom a scorecard on set where people are keeping track of who actually came up with the idea. It doesn't matter, right? Because ultimately, what it's really about is that we all come up with an approach, with a visual approach, that best connect the audience to the subject matter emotionally. So when talking to the director, I do my best to check my ego at the door and remain present and open to conversations about how best to accomplish that connection with the audience. And for that reason, I really don't think it's about I think at all. The third thing I stole from my mentor, my cinematography mentor from when I was studying at AFI, a man named Bill Dill, who is arguably the best living cinematography teacher that there is. He used to preach to us, his cinematography fellows, relentless positivity, which is, I think, just elegant as hell. I really do. So when we were in class doing critiques and we were complaining about how, the director didn't do his or her work and the production didn't do this, not my fault, my gaffer wouldn't do that, and my keeper, hey, it's not me, it's them. He would say, in the face of their cynicism, right? If they get if they get cynical or negative, remain relentlessly positive. Redouble your positivity and your commitment. If you don't, your work is going to remain mediocre and you're going to be miserable. Your days on set are going to suck, and you should probably be an accountant. You should probably just change careers right now because you're not going to be happy. And he was really right. So if you can learn to collaborate, here's the thing, if you can learn to collaborate with people that you wouldn't necessarily choose to hang out with, you're ahead of the curve. Because that means that you'll remain focused on telling the story and not petty interpersonal issues, right? Which is where I try to be. The third thing is about collaboration versus autocracy. As a DP, I definitely prefer to crew up to work with people who are better at their jobs than I am at their job, right? As a manager, that's kind of what I have to do. So my go-to gaffer and key grip have forgotten more about motion picture lighting than I know, and I know a lot. So to me, those two key collaborators and my camera operator aren't there merely to execute my predetermined vision, right? This is not me saying you do this, you do that. Although if necessary, I do. To me, they're there for me to bounce ideas off of, right? And for me to ask, how does it feel to you? Because if I can ask that freely, and if they come up with an idea that's a more appropriate visual approach to telling the story than I had, great, that's what we're gonna do. It's not about the ego, it's not about ownership, it's about what's right for the story. And that approach keeps them on their toes because they know they have to know the script, right? They have to know the character arcs. They have to have an intimate knowledge of the subject matter that we're shooting because they don't know when I'm going to ask them a question. And it also empowers them, right? Because it makes them feel like I value their meaningful input, and I do. So similarly, I'm not there to be the director's camera operator, right? That's not my job. That's not why you hire me. If you want a camera operator, there are other people that I could suggest. I'm there to be the director's key visual collaborator, right? I'm there to offer ideas, I'm there to bounce ideas off of, and I expect to have meaningful conversations with the director, and I certainly expect them to consider my ideas when I bring them up. So interestingly, in the past few years, I found that the best work that I've been producing, the best work that I've been doing, is actually born of limitation, right? Whether it be budgetary limitation, logistical limitations, technical limitations, I do the best work when I'm working within given parameters, right? When I'm working in a box. And I discovered that back in 2008 when Polaroid announced that they were discontinuing production of their instant films, their instant still films. I decided to do a 30-day art project where I would shoot one still photo a day on a Polaroid SX70 with no test shots, no redos. Envision the shot, shoot the shot, there's your piece of art. And it was kind of a reaction to what was going on in my professional life at the time because there was this increasingly common attitude that since we were shooting digitally and not on film, digital's not nearly as precious in terms of finance, that we could just shoot as much as we wanted. We could find the look later in post. And that was antithetical to who I was. I'd been trained to make really specific photographic decisions, right? That's who I am, right? I want to see it in my mind and I want to figure out technically how to do it, and that's how I want it to look. The idea of pushing these decisions off to post was neither fish nor fowl to me. I didn't know what to make of it. So the Polaroids rekindled my desire to bake in the decisions that the director and I have discussed and decide are right for the story rather than applying them later, right? And because of that project, I feel like I now make bolder decisions when we execute all that stuff in production rather than wait till post. And I feel like my work has also become more specific and more personal. If we may, is it all right? Can I show a couple examples? We good? Everybody good? Thank you. Okay. Here are a couple examples of those Polaroids. And again, these were pre-visualize, shoot the same day. No tests. So my idea, I'll go back here so I'm not blocking anybody's view, sorry. My idea was to make these feel kind of timeless and a little bit nostalgic. Different kind of lighting, it's all good. The guy who stomached that is in the back, graduated from UNLV Film in '94, just to bring it full circle. Anyway, I'll just buzz through this. I was here for NAB, so I took a picture of Vegas, look at that. I'm a type 1 diabetic, and I just wanted to get a sense of what a month's worth of supplies look like. So there you go. Secret disease, right? Yeah, here you go. I'll just buzz through these. So here's one this is a still photo this is a screen grab from a commercial I just shot a few weeks ago. And what I found is my desire to bake all this stuff in, I'm obsessive about it now. So this is not post-production, all the flares are real. It's my key grip with 2 flashlights with different colored gels on them, flaring the lens. And there's a white fishnet stocking from American Apparel stretched behind the lens to make it soft, which looks kind of like this through the lens. So by baking this stuff in, I'm not relying on some bullshit filter in post, right? This is organic, and this is actually being, baked into the work. So this is the kind of wacky stuff we do. Mini whisk on the front of the lens, hit it with a little bit of light, neat flare. This all came out of a beauty spot that I shot a few years ago where I had flared the lens with a lot of natural light, and in post they had added this very digital looking, very artificial looking flare, and it was like nails in a chalkboard for me. So I decided no more of this. If we're flaring, we're gonna flare in camera. Similarly, even when I do visual effects stuff, this is from a McDonald's commercial for the Netherlands. Even when I do visual effects stuff, I encourage the director to think about using animatronic reindeer for this Christmas spot instead of doing CG reindeer. It was a pain in the neck, but it really looks much more organic, right? So again, connection with the audience, right? So this is from a movie I just shot called Polis. The director and I talked a lot about, even though it's a visual effects heavy science fiction movie, we talked a lot about how to pull the audience in. We picked this one crazy lens from the 70s that flares pink. Same focal length lens, different part of the movie, different series of lenses for a totally different kind of flare, more story appropriate. There's my Kubrick homage. So I want to talk just for a sec about TED Talks. Awesome, thank you. This is my favorite one. This is the very first TED Talk I ever shot. This is Jill Balti-Taylor, talk about crying behind the lens. My first TED in 2008. So here's the thing. Jill, this is the closest close-up that we were shooting at that time, right? This is not a terribly close close-up. We realized over time, as we were developing, that to put the audience in the best seat in the house, we had to do that. And this is my second favorite. This is Brene Brown. Her talks on shame and vulnerability. They're good. So, but it wasn't just that. This was our close-up that we had decided on. But all of a sudden, her talk was so good. I was talking to the opera. I was like, push in, push in, push in, push in, push in, because we needed that. And that all of a sudden became that, right? So all of a sudden, our tight close-up at TED is now this, and we've gotten too tight. Now we've backed off again. I know. But we were always looking for new places to put the camera to really put the audience in the best seat in the house. And this is one of my favorite talks. And Erica, you should know Dan Pallotta if you don't know him. He's your people. Dan is, well, anyway, blah, blah. Camera in a good place, good close-ups, interesting stuff behind them, make it interesting. And then we've got Monica Lewinsky, whom we shot this year, whose talk about vulnerability was out of this world. And because of that, I would not normally shoot that tight a close-up on a woman. There you go. I think she looks spectacular. Anyway, that's what brings you into the story. I wouldn't normally shoot somebody from below like that, but we found an angle that worked for her, right? Now, this is a still photo that I took on the top of a volcano when I lived in Japan that's dirty as heck, right? It's totally grainy. It's not about being technically perfect, right? I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I was at the beginning of my still photo career, but I love this image. There's something about that still speaks to me, even though it's totally grainy and anyway. Now, when I lived in Japan, I was at a tea ceremony and there was a scroll that had this written on it, and it stopped me in my tracks. It reads, in Japanese it reads Ichigo Ichie, which means one meeting, one experience, right? Part of the organic connection is that we can't possibly recreate moments, right? What we have to do is assemble a group of people who can create those moments and capture those moments the first time, okay? Thank you. Sorry.